A lot of people have been asking me about how I mix my ground bait, and I always say in my fishing videos that I do it at home, and I'm literally sitting in my garage now, and I'm quickly gonna show to you how I actually go ahead and mix my ground bait at home a day or sometimes even a couple of days before I go fishing. So let's run you through it. First of all, you can see in my hand I've got a whisk here. Now these whisks work exceptionally well. Obviously you need to attach it to a drill and then you can mix your ground bait like that. And like you can see, I've got a very good drill that's worked hard over the years. But this new ground bait that I've developed and make myself, you don't actually need this. It's so easy just to mix your ground bait by hand that a drill like that is actually not necessary. So the packaging is 800 grams of ground bait, and that roughly equates to about 3 liters of wet mix, depending on what you put in with it. But these bags are so handy, they pack away nicely, and it's enough ground bait for a day's feeder fishing. So you can see I've got 2 bags of ground bait here, and I've also got a bag of this brown stuff. Now this is actually the soil, and I did explain in one of my fishing videos how I actually add it and why I add it, but I had to dug it out on the bank. Now this soil I've actually prepared in advance and also bagged it up for myself, so it's going to make my life so much easier. And I'm going to prepare 2 mixes like I usually do when I go fishing. So 1 bag of ground bait would be for using through the feeder, actually fishing with. The other bag of ground bait will be combined with the soil to actually act as my initial mix that I will kickstart my swim off with. So I'm going to mix both at home, and I'm going to show you how to do both of them, how to store them, and also what sort of additives I like to add to my ground baits. So the mix that I'm going to make first would be the mix that I'm going to fish with. So I'm going to take 1 bag of ground bait, I'm going to open it up and just empty it into a bucket. Now I've got a bucket here of tap water, and I do not worry. Some people say you can't use tap water, it's got all the chemicals in. Well, it's never bothered the fish for me when I've used it, so I keep on using tap water. It just makes my life easy. And then I've got a 1 pint bait bucket. Now the additive that I've got in my hand is a molasses, and this stuff is actually a berry molasses, and it's not fermented, but it swells up a little bit over time just because of the active ingredients in there. It's got a little bit of berries in there, like real berries actually. I also make this myself at home, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a generous amount of this stuff to the bottom of this 1 pint bait tub. Now you can see there it's not too much. It's a nice thick molasses. It contains a little bit of berries. It's not really flavored. There's no chemicals in this actually, so it hasn't got really any flavor apart from its natural sort of molasses sugary flavor. And then to that I'm just going to add some water. Like I said, just tap water like that, and then I just simply mix it. I just dissolve this molasses mixture into the water. And the reason why I do this is not for the flavor. It's not like a dip or anything. It's not actually for attraction. It's to make the ground bait heavier and to give it a bit more body so that it can stay on the bottom better. So I'm just going to use it like that, and this first lot I'll just empty like half of it into the ground bait. And like I said, very easy just to mix it by hand. You do not need a drill and whisk for this. You can see this ground bait already is drawing in that water quite quickly. After that initial amount of water that I've put in, I'm just going to add the rest, but be careful when adding the rest because you can easily and quickly overdo it. And once that happens, you need to be very patient and wait a long time for the ground bait to draw in all the moisture before you can actually put it through a riddle. If you overwet it, there's a big possibility that you can ruin it completely. So just be careful with the amount of water that you put in, and you'll know that you'll be fine with your ground bait. You will feel as you mix it through your fingers, it becomes heavier as it draws in the moisture. soaks it up, and you also get that beautiful smell, that sweet biscuity smell coming out of the ground bait. You can see it's full of lumps. Obviously that's where a lot of the moisture is trapped, and that's why we're going to put it through a riddle. But before I do that, I'm going to leave this now for about 10 minutes just to absorb all this water, and after that I will put it through the riddle to make sure that we distribute the moisture content evenly. So one of the main reasons why I mix my ground bait at home is because I've got time. I don't necessarily have this sort of time on the bank, and even if I do, I want to spend that time focusing on other things. And when I'm mixing ground bait, and the main reason for mixing it at home is because I can take my time and make sure the ground bait is not in a rushed process. It's not mixed by being rushed and not thoroughly mixed like the way I want it to. So by mixing it at home, I can give it plenty of time to absorb the water, to take it in, and then I can add more water as time goes by, because you will find that this ground bait, the longer you leave it, the more moisture it will absorb. And that's exactly what's happened here. I've left it about 10 minutes now, and apart from the fact that there's quite a bit of lumps that I do need to riddle out, which will help to distribute the moisture content, you can also see that it's dried out quite significantly. And by taking your time to mix your ground bait, you can get it perfectly right. I want this ground bait to be almost on the verge of like too wet, but just before that sort of line where it's too wet. And then I know once I get to the water, this ground bait's going to be so dormant, it's just going to lay on the bottom ready for the fish to feed over. So after 10 minutes, I'm just going to add a small amount of water again, like that. And you'll notice it's always just small amounts. Do not add too much water at one time, because you can ruin it very quickly. I can already feel, because I left it and I gave it enough time, I can feel now by adding that water that I've just added, look how it's sticking to my fingers. So it is getting to that point where it's almost becoming a bit too wet, and where it's becoming like a cake, which is what you don't want. But just before you get to that point, that's where you want to be. So again, this ground bait is now, I can feel literally how heavy this is, which is exactly what I want. If I was to press this now, you'll see, check that ball it forms. It's way too wet, and that will not come out of your feeder. So we need to give this time now to absorb all this water, and then we definitely need to put it through a riddle, and then it will be perfect. So next up, I need to make my initial feed mix that I'm gonna bombard into my swim at the start of my session to draw in the fish. Now, you do not need to be as careful with this. We're not going to be as thorough with this. We're not going to mix it as wet as the other mix. So while I've left that mix there on the side to absorb all that moisture, I'm quickly going to run you through how I actually mix this initial mix that I'm going to put in over a wide area on my fishing spot. So there you can see there's the dry ground bait in the bucket. And now I'm just going to go ahead. You can also add the molasses to this if you want to. I'm going to add some water here, not too much again, and then mix it. You can see this mix is also much lighter than that one. Obviously, the molasses helps to darken up your mix as well. But for this mix, we don't really need that, because we're going to mix it 50-50 with the soil. So I've now given my initial mix about 10 minutes to absorb the water, and you can see it's quite dry. So it's going to take a little bit more water, but remember, I do not want this as wet as the mix that I'm actually going to fish with. This stuff can be a little bit more active. It can be fizzing and popping a bit more, because together with the soil, it's going to be spread over a wide area to draw the fish in, and then I'll fish with that mix in the middle over the top. So the water I'm going to add now is really not going to be a lot. It's just to keep this ground bait and lean together, and that is definitely enough. You can see immediately how quickly this ground bait absorbs moisture, so be careful if you mix this. I'm going to give it about 10 minutes again after this. Also going to push it through a riddle, and then I will add the soil. Given this mix another couple of minutes just to stand, and as you can see, it's absorbed a lot of water and it's quite dry, but I'm going to keep it that way. So I've just brought in another big bucket here just to make my life easier. Now I'm quickly going to push that through a pinky riddle, if I can get it to fit on here. There we go. Now I just simply add this ground bait on top of the riddle and I push it through. Now remember what this does. It breaks up all those lumps. That lumps is where all of the moisture is now trapped. So by doing it this way, you are now spreading that moisture content evenly throughout the mix. And if you look at that, if I compare the two, it's the same mix, but the one in the green bucket is a lot more lumpy, whereas the one in the yellow bucket is now even, nice and fine, and perfect for the lean to get added. So now you can see that mix has been riddled through very nicely. It's quite dry, like I said, that's the way I want it. Now I'm just going to put the riddle back on top of this bucket. I'm going to open up the bag of soil or lean. You can see this has been prepared in advance. It's nice and clean. It's quite damp. And I'm just going to riddle this soil through. You can see there's also some lumps in there. And I'm just going to put it on top of that initial ground bait mix, and this will then form my initial mix. There we go. Now I can go ahead and just mix it together. It's going to add a lot of weight. It's going to make sure that it creates a nice cloud. It's very attractive. Obviously into this I'm going to put a lot of chop worm when I go fishing, but that I will do next to the water. So by taking my time at home and mixing my ground bait meticulously and thoroughly, I get lovely mixes like this, bearing in mind that other mix have been standing there all the time. We've been busy with this one, so I know I've been giving that enough time to absorb that water, to absorb that molasses, and that is going to be the cherry on the cake, because this stuff is going to get spread over a wide area and then get the fish, draw them in, and then that's hopefully going to catch them. Moving on, there you can see my lovely initial mix with the soil. It does not contain as much food content. It's nice and 50-50 evenly mixed soil and ground bait. To that I will add a little bit of particle, some chop worm, just to get some smell in that, and then spread it over a wide area. So that's the initial mix done. I move on from there. This is the first time now, and it's probably been, I don't know, 20 minutes to half an hour, that I'm moving back to my main mix that I'm going to use in the feeder. And as you can see, a lot of lumps in this. It's absorbed most of that moisture now. You can see when I press a ball, it does not form like a clay ball like before. So that tells me by giving it enough time, I've let it absorb most of that moisture, which is exactly why I mix it at home. Now I'm just going to run it through a riddle to get rid of the lumps, again, to spread that moisture content. And then this ground bait is going to be perfect for use inside the feeder. So there we go. That is the ground bait done and ready for the weekend's fishing. Just going to recap. That is my initial mix, a 50-50 mixture of ground bait and leam or soil. Nice and heavy. It's going to cloud up the water column. Going to spread it over a wide area. And then this mixture is actually the mix that I'm going to use inside the feeder. I'm obviously going to pack it with particle like chop worm and corn and hemp seed and whatever else, but this is going to be my mix that I'm going to catch the fish with. So it's a lot heavier, it's going to be a lot more smelly, so in essence it's going to be like the cherry on the cake. Then the only thing that's left to do after this is just to bag it up. Now there's nothing special about that. I just simply take a handy carrier bag, I put it in there like that, fill it up, make a knot, and just leave it in the fridge, or you can even freeze it. Nothing's going to happen to it. It's not going to turn sour. It's going to stay nice and fresh until you get to the water, where obviously you just empty it back into the bucket and you're ready to go.